Hi, my name is Emily Killian, and I did my final project for my gender and sexualities class about toxic masculinity in the media. So, I believe that toxic masculinity in the media is important because it is one of the main forms of communicating with the audience. And if you show that toxic masculinity is okay and suppressing your emotions and having to act manly and tough and violent is okay, then nothing is going to be fixed. So I believe that toxic masculinity in the media recently has been much better. And from about the 90s on, we have done a very good job at showing that having to suppress your emotions or refuse to cry, for example, isn't something that you should be proud of, and it doesn't mean that that makes you a man. And I believe that by showing this and opening up to the fact that men are allowed to have emotions and they're allowed to express their true selves, then I believe that women will start being treated better as well, because the anger that men can have built up will sometimes be taken out on women. So, in my first slide, with my presentation slide with toxic masculinity, I have a graph of the perceived societal expectations of young men. So, I have society saying 69% think society expects men to act strong, 60% expects men to fight back when pushed, 56% expect men to never say no to sex, and 35% expect men to use violence to get respect. So I believe that these numbers are extremely high for today's society, and nothing is going to be fixed if we don't start taking action. So I believe that the media is a great form of getting through to men, and I believe that toxic masculinity in the media has been much better in today's society rather than back in the 80s and earlier, where toxic masculinity was much more evident and they didn't do anything to fight against it. So, in my first slide about the film that I chose, I believe that The Incredibles 2 from 2018 by Disney Pixar is a really amazing representation of toxic masculinity being fought and kind of broken down with the barriers that have been set up all throughout the years. Mr. Incredible is shown to be a stay-at-home dad in this movie, and he does an absolutely incredible job at taking care of his children, even though it was a little rough at first, but everybody takes time to get good at what they're doing, even if that means being a parent. And stay-at-home dads should be praised just as much as moms. And this movie does a really incredible job at showing that the mom can be in the spotlight, and you don't just have to fight villains to be a superhero, because Mr. Incredible is just as much of a superhero as Mrs. Incredible, because they're both saving the day for their children and for the world. So in the one picture that I have on the top in the middle, Mr. Incredible is reading a bedtime story to Jack Jack, and I really liked this because it shows how Mr. Incredible is working so hard because he's falling asleep instead of Jack Jack, his son. So it just shows how hard he's working to be a great dad, while Elastigirl on the bottom is the one that's out fighting crime. While in the first movie, it was reversed, where Elastigirl was the one that stayed home all the time. So this movie did incredible with the box office. The reviews were outstanding, and it was very much appreciated by stay-at-home dads and the other families who aren't like the classic nuclear family. So I think that this film did a really amazing job. It broke down toxic masculinity because men can be emotional and they can be stay-at-home dads. They don't just have to be the breadwinners. So for my second choice for my television show, I did Queer Eye by David Collins in 2018. So this TV show, has 5 non-binary men. They are all homosexual, and it features one man who covers fashion, one who covers hair and makeup, one who covers food, one who covers counseling, so to say, and one who helps completely redesign the person's home. So these 5 men, they call themselves the Fab Five. They have a new person every week that they help and completely give them a makeover to help them feel more comfortable in their own skin and just happy with themselves. And so I think that this is a really perfect show that breaks down toxic masculinity, because the Fab Five show each man or woman that they're with, but it's mostly men, that they are allowed to show emotion and they're allowed to cry and they're allowed to want more from life rather than just being emotionless and tough and the tough man. And they're allowed to wish that they had more and they want to break apart from that. And so the Fab Five really helps each person that they include on their show to be more authentically true to themselves. They show that it's okay to cry, which is one of the main reasons why I love this show so much, because I know so many men who believe that crying is so weak and it's girly and they can't cry. And this show really is comfortable showing true emotions, just like how women are, and men should be allowed to as well. In the bottom right corner, I have a picture of Anthony, the member of the Fab Five that covers the food aspect, and he breaks down crying in one episode because he feels so overwhelmingly happy and comfortable with the group of people that he's with, and everybody around him is so supportive, and they don't say, "Oh, boys don't cry, you can't do that." They help him, and they hug him, and they make him feel comfortable and loved. So I have other examples, along with the covers from the TV show, of just scenes where men feel so happy and loved, and almost sometimes that it moves them to tears. So I believe that toxic masculinity is broken down in this show because society has been much more aware of how they can be treated, and I believe that the show is very incredibly popular with the audience, and people are really learning from their message. So with my third choice was my piece of literature. I did The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton from 1983. So apart from The Incredibles 2 and Queer Eye, I believe that this book kind of encourages the belief of toxic masculinity and the actions that are associated with that, including emotionless and being super tough and violent and never saying no to sex, referencing back to the bar graph in the beginning of my presentation. I read this book in 9th grade or 8th grade, somewhere around there. So when I was like 13 years old, right, along with the men in the class as well, or boys, so to say, since we were so young. And this really just struck me because when I was younger, I didn't think too much about the toxic masculinity, but with being so prone to change in your mind and being right in the middle of puberty, and we have to read a book that is all about toxic masculinity and being super tough and violent and like never working things out, just resulting to violence no matter what it is. I believe that this book has just really encouraged some toxic masculinity, especially having it being written in 1983. So back then, I believe that these actions were encouraged rather than stopped. And I think that by reading this book, even though it's extremely well written and a great read for anybody of any age, I believe that toxic masculinity in this novel is not right for the future, and we shouldn't be showing our young, impressionable audience of young boys that this is how you want to act. Because if we encourage them that you can be true to yourself instead of having to fight whatever you're feeling, that toxic masculinity can be ended. So for my next choice, I did my musical piece, which was Holding Out for a Hero by Bonnie Tyler from 1983. So this also came out the same year as S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders. So Holding Out for a Hero is a great song. I love it. It's very catchy and really fun to listen to. But since doing this project, I realized that the expectations that are placed upon men in this song is pretty intense. And so with the lyrics here, in my slide I have on the top picture, it says, he's got to be strong, and he's got to be fast, and he's got to be fresh from the fight. I need a hero. He's got to be sure. It's got to be soon. He's got to be larger than life. So these are all very high expectations placed upon men, and the majority of them being physical qualities, like strong and fast. And I believe this really directly ties into like violence and not really allowing yourself to be emotional or connect with somebody else. Like how in Queer Eye, for example, all of these men, they can still be strong, but they build connections with one another. And I believe that this shows that back then in the 80s and before, that all people really cared about with men was just them being strong and capable of being a protector rather than somebody to really connect with and form a bond with. So I believe that this musical piece encourages toxic masculinity. In reference to that, the bottom left image is Superman, and it says holding out for a hero around it, because it sounds like most of the qualities that Bonnie Tyler is describing are from a superhero. Strong, fast, larger than life. And of course men can be strong, fast, and larger than life, but having that expectation on every single man that you meet, it only encourages men to view themselves in a negative light and not feel comfortable with themselves. So for my advertisement, I did a Huggies diaper advertisement. I believe that this is a great advertisement because it shows that there can be stay-at-home dads who can take care of their kids. And it's not just moms that change diapers, it can be dads too. So I unfortunately couldn't find a year from this advertisement. I looked all over the place, but I couldn't find one, unfortunately. But it is very recent, and it shows at the bottom, it says, put leak lock to the ultimate test, dad. So it's really calling out fathers who are stay-at-home dads, or the ones who don't really feel comfortable enough to do a job that women supposedly are in charge of. And it shows that anybody can be in charge of it. And toxic masculinity with families, it can have an effect on fathers because they may not have as emotional of a connection to their family because they feel like they can't. So I believe that this is a really great advertisement, and it breaks down toxic masculinity for advertisement and the marketplace and manufacturing, because anybody who's just walking through the store can see that and be reminded that anybody can help change their baby's diaper. So finally, my work of art are Judy Chicago's Power Play series, ranging from 1982 to 1987. So these really struck me because they show the struggles that men face with not being able to show their emotions. And so on the top, there are 3 photos next to each other. One on the left looks shocked, happy. This is all how I interpret the piece, by the way. I didn't read anything. This is just what I believe when I look at it. In the middle, he looks almost agonizing, like in pain, upset. And on the right, he looks angry. So I believe that these really show the contrast that men face when they're forced to repress these emotions. Suppress, I mean. And it can really take an effect on them. Like, it can lead to lash out in anger or violence, which I see in the red hue around the men and all of the definition and the shading in their face. So I really believe that shows that there's so much straining and effort that goes into suppressing everything, that it can really have a negative effect on the ones around them. And women, for example, it can show that men are much more violent because they're forced to deal with these emotions that society places upon them. And so I believe that all of the artwork and the colors and the placement and the emotions that each man is feeling in this first piece of art really represents how men were feeling back in the 80s, and still currently how they're not able to be true to themselves. So on the bottom, this one I thought was very interesting because on the left, it shows that the man is crying and he's very upset. And on the right, he almost looks disgusted. Well, both of them do, but on the left, I noticed tears going down the man's face. And on their tongue, it says, really, really sad and power and mad. And it shows that men have these emotions right on the tip of their tongue, but they're not able to actually express them. And the tears on the man's face on the left can almost be how much he's struggling in order to hold this all back, that it moves him to tears. And having on the man's tongue power and mad and really sad, it just shows that men should not have to hide their identity or feel trapped with who they are. And speaking of identity, this piece of art really reminded me of Borderlands by Gloria Anzaldúa, because she struggled with who she was and with Latina and Chicana and American, because she lives in Texas, that it shows that men and women both struggle with their identities, and they shouldn't have to have anything pressured onto them to be who they are. So I believe that this piece of art really displays how toxic masculinity has affected men, and all of these And all of these examples, The Incredibles 2, Queer Eye, The Outsiders, Holding Out for a Hero, Huggies, and Power Play series, they all show that in the past, toxic masculinity has been much more evident than it is in the present, And in the future, I believe that we will get even close to helping men be who they are without having to hold back and live up to society's expectations. And the media is really doing an amazing job helping men feel more comfortable in their own skin. Thank you.